Yo!
Doing them clackers.
And here we go.
Hello, and welcome to the Hackaday Podcast. I'm Tom Nardi.
And I'm Dan Maloney.
This is episode 286, showing off SAOs, hiding from HOAs, and beautiful byproducts. Well, this is the second week without Elliot Williams.
Without his wise guidance.
Yes. He's
and
enjoying his
skills.
He's enjoying his time off so much that I have not heard anything from him, actually.
Nah.
Last time I spoke to him, he's like, I'll leave you my phone number if there's an emergency. And guess what he did not leave me with before he went?
I'll leave you with a phone number.
8675. But no, we've been good. Everything going well at the Hackaday HQ. In fact, we have some news this week, which I'm pretty excited about. We announced that we'll be doing an SAO contest in the lead up to SuperCon, and for those who might not be up on their badge terminology, that is a simple add-on, although we are kind of co-opting the acronym this year and calling it a SuperCon add-on. Not that we will be changing the pinout or how it works or anything, but I think it wouldn't be given too much away to say that we want the SAOs to be an integral part of it. You know, one of the coolest things is seeing people bring hardware to SuperCon that plugs into the badge. We've always had some kind of like expansion port. A handful of folks will show up with a custom professional PCB that can plug into that port and does something. And it's always been amazing that they could get that done in, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks on the high side. Plus, they never saw the badge, right? They saw a picture of the badge. They saw, maybe we had Gerbers or something that they could line up, but it was, just off of what we could put out there. No, they had no physical badge to test against. They didn't know if the thing would physically connect to it, let alone actually, work electrically, because they don't get the badge till SuperCon, right? And that limits people a lot. And by using the SAO standard, which is, it's a 2x3 pin header, you got power, I2C, and a couple GPIO pins, we can kind of alleviate that. Like, what the interface is, what power you're getting, what signals you're getting, and we hope that the result is going to be a lot more people bringing in custom hardware and try to light a fire under some people. We're going to do this contest in addition to that. But one of the things we really want to push is functional SAOs, and that's kind of a category of SAO that almost doesn't exist. Not to belittle anyone's work, right? But most SAOs, the vast majority, just kind of blink LEDs, and and that's fine. They were always kind of treated as a decorative bit of flair, and I can't even think of one. I'm not going to say there aren't out there, but off the top of my head, I can't even think of one that really ever used the I2C pins in there to talk to the host badge. And that's where we want to kind of move the needle. We really, really want people's SAOs to communicate with the badge, and we want them to do something and to kind of change the idea of what the SAO could be. So, we're looking for stuff like sensor SAOs or, SAOs that are displays that you can, push data to through I2C.
First thing that comes to mind for me is some sort of mesh network that networks all the badges together. Meshtastic or something like that.
Right, yeah, like radio SAOs would be really cool. So that, you could, if two people had them, they could communicate, that kind of thing. So that's kind of what we're really hoping to see a lot of, is people putting interesting hardware on the SAOs, using that I2C to talk to the badge and other SAOs. And we just wanted to really see what happens, and we want to make it easy for people to make their own hardware. And the winning SAOs, there's going to be 4 winners. You can see the full rules on the contest page because there is some fine print there. But the winners, the idea here is to put them into production and distribute them to everyone who goes to Hackaday Europe in 2025.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
All right, well, now it's the part of the podcast where we play What's That Sound? Last week, we played a sound, and this week we go over the winners. I should say that I think I made it too easy. Before he left, Elliot said, give him a break. The last one was really hard. We only got one answer, and I think it was a wrong answer, right? Even the one person who tried didn't get it right. So he said, give him something a little easier. And I looked around the room, and I found something, and it sounds a little bit like this.
Okay, that's easy enough. I've got one of those sitting around here someplace too. I don't know where. I think it's in the garage. It's one of those radio cranky deals.
Yep.
The generator makes that unique sound.
Yeah. It's actually a radio / flashlight, which made things particularly complicated because people would say, well, it's a flashlight or it's a radio. And both were correct. So we have to give it to them in either event. We had 54 responses, and of those, 46 were correct. So I think the bar was perhaps a little bit too low on this one. But that's okay. It's not meant to be that challenging, I suppose.
We're not trying to make it a big deal.
Yeah, right. Of the 9 that were not correct, everybody got some kind of a windy thing for the most part, which, I think it's a pretty distinctive sound, right?
Yeah.
We got, somebody said a cassette tape rewinding. Okay. Somebody said a wind-up walking toy. I could definitely see that. This one is very specific. A crank-operated railroad telephone. It would have been awesome if that was it.
That's close, yeah.
Yeah, even that's... All of them have the idea of, like, something is spinning. I like this one. Every motorized toy from my childhood being back-driven.
To destruction.
Oh, and you know what? I think I have to move this one into the win column because then parentheses it says, or mechanically equivalent a hand crank generator. So, all right. So, okay. 47 winners. Great. And this one, I love this one. The Evel Knievel stunt cycle being wound up. That was a core memory being unlocked for that particular listener. The wrong memory, but still.
Well, you know what? This probably brings up a good topic for an OC. Why do gears sound that way?
Ooh.
That's a very distinctive sound, and it's always a geared mechanism of some sort. So, okay, I'm on it.
There you go.
There we go. Got it right in OC now.
See, inspiration comes from all over. You never know.
Weird places, yep.
Okay, so Elliot usually has some kind of whimsical way of doing this. He'll roll a die and then do a magic spell. I don't have anything like that. So we're just going to pick a random number in the range of winners. And the number is 26, which, if I've done this correctly, is... Oh, come on. So their name is BMGXYZ. Well, that really just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
Okay.
They have a proper name, but it wasn't in the column for what I'm allowed to say, so I won't say that. You know who you are out there. This answer is cranking a human-powered flashlight, which is it's an interesting way of putting it, but it is accurate. Who would do the cranking in a human-powered flashlight if not the human, I wonder. Okay, so, well, I'm not going to say that again, but BM letters, you are the winner of a Hackaday Podcast t-shirt. We will push the appropriate buttons to get that sent out to you. And next week, we will have a new sound. Elliot will be back, so perhaps it will be something a little bit, somewhere in between one wrong answer and 48 correct ones will be next week's sound. All right, well, my first pick this week is actually one that Dan wrote up, so this will ease him into it. This is a nice retro displays set this watch on edge, and this is it's a gorgeous, I would almost say a timepiece, right? Because looking at it, I didn't think it was a watch at first, especially the main art just has it sitting on the table. There's no obvious band or anything. This is one of the ones where, if you're listening to this, it's a little bit difficult to appreciate the topic, but it's got like a stacked PCB kind of construction. Looks like 3 boards, and there's a female header on the one side, and into that is plugged in this HP HDSP 2000 LED matrix, a 5x7 LED matrix. And they look just gorgeous. They're like this amber color, very old school. This is not the 20-cent LED segment display you might be thinking. This is proper stuff here. I mean, certainly the star of the show is the display, right? Like, you can't not love that. But one of the other cool details that you had pointed out in the write-up is that did this with the AT Tiny 85, which it was once so popular. There's actually a when we write the articles, we can categorize them into different things. There's actually a category for AT Tiny 85 projects, because at one point it was like everything that came in used this, and now of course we're on to much more modern microcontrollers. But it's cool to still see people using these older chips, and especially when they're kind of pushing the limits. 85 doesn't have a whole lot going for it in terms of I/O, so to be able to drive this many pins and just to be a clock in the first place is pretty impressive. It definitely was a trickier path, but I guess you could argue it comes off as more impressive that way. I mean, you could have done it with a Pi Pico, and it would have been probably just a Pi Pico and the displays. Like,
exactly.
I don't think you would have needed anything else by using the lower end microcontroller. It took a lot of other support stuff, and then you get this nice stacked construction, and the whole thing just really comes across as all the more impressive because it took the road less traveled.
Yeah, those displays are what caught my eye right off the bat, and I agree that amber is just gorgeous. Red would look great and all that, but for some reason that there's the tone of that display looks absolutely gorgeous. And even when the display is off, it's gorgeous. It's got the the matrices, the little each 5x7 matrix, and then in between them is the shift registers, for each of those segments, to drive each of those segments. But those are just a naked die that you can see underneath the glass cover of this chip, and then you can see the gold, bonding wires going out from the die out to the different parts of the display. Just totally gorgeous. And I was wondering where I'd seen these displays. There was a comment in the that someone left in the I/O project that you got a drawer full of them from old cell phones, and I was like, that's where it was. That came from the Microtac, the Motorola Microtacs. Back in the day had these alphanumeric displays, and that's what's great about them too, is that they're actually alphanumeric. You're not just limited to digits with this clock, and you can see in the video too when he's going through the setting process. There's hours, minutes, prompts for what to do to set the time. So thought this was great, and actually having the guts to to go with something with 5 pins of I/O on it to try to drive all these segments, I thought was really cool too. And then to come, he does put it in a case. It doesn't mention anything about actually constructing the case, but it looks like it's made out of excuse me, looks like it's made out of wood veneer, like walnut veneer or something like that, that's been bent into this rectangular shape and puts a watch band on it. I mean, totally impractical for everyday wear, but that's not really the point. It's just a nice, it's almost like a bit of circuit sculpture if you get down to it.
And speaking of these interesting displays, it's kind of an apt segue to talk about a really cool exhibit that the folks at the Supply Frame Design Lab are trying to put together for SuperCon this year. They want to collect all kinds of weird and wonderful displays, just like this one, and kind of put up a sort of, evolution of electronic displays sort of thing. Although even that is kind of limiting, because if it was like if it's a mechanical display, that would be cool too. The flip dots and flaps and that sort of thing. Basically, if it displays information, they want to put it out there on display.
There you go. A display
displays on display. It displays on display. I'll link the article for that into the show notes. But basically, there's a form you can fill out and say, hey, this is what I got, and they'll work with you about getting it there, getting it on display, and it will be available for everybody who comes to SuperCon, and my understanding is through the month of November, the display will stay up, so other people coming and going through the design lab can check it out. Sounds like a really cool addition to an already awesome event. So if you want to support that and you have something cool you want to show off, let them know.
And it's not that far away.
It is shockingly not that far away. Tell me about it.
Yeah. Well, we're painfully aware of it, but everybody out there knows November's not that far away.
I cannot believe how close it is. I'm pretty sure that's why Elliot went on vacation now. He was like, I gotta get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of time before they really drinking from the fire hose.
First up for me, fast 3D printing with a Polar 4-quadrant custom machine. This isn't 3D printing like you've ever seen it before. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen this form factor before. This is from Nathan from Nathan Builds Robots, and he wanted to get into sort of that high speed, high throughput printing, and at the same time maybe increase the print volume or the build volume of a printer. So what he came up with is a combination. And this is another one of those ones that's going to be very hard to describe. You're going to just have to go look at it. But basically what it is a polar turntable over which 4 robot arms, kind of almost like Scara arms, got only one dimension. The head only goes in and out radially and up and down. So up and down over the bed. So Z direction. 4 heads, 4 different robots, and the turntable turns. If all of that's not confusing enough, okay, I get you. But when you look at it, it makes sense. But then you've got to think about the kinematics there and how he's organizing 4 heads to work on the same print at the same time. He's also got it where it works on 4 or more different prints simultaneously, and it just sort of puts the current work zone underneath the turntable and does maybe 4 or 8 copies of something small, or they can all team up and work together on something big. This thing's putting out more than 1 kilogram of plastic an hour, which just sounds horrible in terms of affording all that filament. And he's making things that are just ridiculously large. I mean, you could nearly print a 55-gallon drum on this thing. It's almost big enough for something like that. He's printing waste baskets that are the size of like a desk waste basket, but out of just great masses of plastic. It's an interesting concept. I'm not sure that it's practical in the way that he's done it here, but I think it might have potential for higher throughput printing, where instead of one print head trying to print 4 or 8 of something at a time, you can actually just print, you could do one run and have 4 different printers working on a common platform at the same time. So interesting concept.
I like that we both picked stories that are very difficult to visualize to start off the podcast. Perhaps it was naive of me to think that, once 3D printers hit kind of the mainstream, and I think we're as probably mainstream as we're going to get, that people would stop making these crazy custom contraptions because, you didn't need to make a printer. You could just go buy one. And then the reality is, I think there are people who just really dig making 3D printers, and the printing part is almost, as an afterthought, right? Like, well, I got to print something, so I'll just print whatever. But they really just want to, like I said, push the limits of the kinematics and just this is, you said something about like, if this catches on, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is not going to catch on. But I don't think that was ever the point either, right? Like this is never meant for anything other than pushing the envelope and looking at what you can do. And that's fine. That's right. I mean, I think most of the stuff we run on Hackaday could be described like
Yeah.
that. If you could buy it on Amazon, we probably aren't talking about it. Well, my next pick is 3D printed electronics breadboard. Talk about from one unnecessary 3D printing project to another. No, I kid. They're all necessary because they bring us entertainment and joy. This is just like it sounds like. It is 3D printing your breadboards, and in a world where breadboards are pennies, and you probably already have a stack of them, you might be saying, "Well, why would I want to 3D print a breadboard?" And I'll be honest with you, I don't have an answer for that. I suppose you could do custom sizes, and if you have such a unique requirement, I would propose that perhaps a breadboard is not the best answer, and maybe you should just get a board, a PCB made. But be that as it may, this is an article about what it takes to 3D print a breadboard. And what I thought was really interesting about this is that obviously you're not printing the metal bits inside, right? This is just about printing the skeleton or whatever, if you will. It's the little cells, and then on the flip side, it has the holes where you put your components in. Actually, the 3D printing is almost the smallest part of this thing, right? Because you're just printing the outside, almost decorative thing. Well, I guess it keeps it from potentially shorting out, but it's not the important part of the breadboard. The important part of the breadboard is the springs inside, and where do you get these springs? Do you just go and buy them? Well, it turns out that Kevin from the Jumperless project, which you might recall won the 2023 Hackaday prize. It's a incredible, I don't even know, where do you even begin? It's a automated breadboard that can make all the connections for you on the backside, so you don't have to use jumpers, and you can program it, and there's a reason it won the Hackaday prize. It is phenomenal. But in the process of designing and building that, he needed these springs, and he turned out no one would sell him the springs. You can't just go and say, give me the springs, So he had them made. And I don't know how many you need to have made to have, these spring things custom manufactured, but the number must be high enough that you then turn around and start selling them on Tindy because you have a lot of them. So the actual springs used in this project are from the Jumperless board, which I thought was a really cool detail.
I guess the only other thing that I can think of, the only use case I can think of for a custom board like this would be one where the trench in the middle was the width, so you could use like a big 28 pin or 40 pin dip or something like that, And you're not, you just spread that out a little bit so you don't lose a couple of rows of, or columns, rows of contacts. That would be my obvious use case, or like doing something like Jumperless, because these metal clips do have, through hole, tabs that can solder into a perf board in this case, or into a PCB or something like that. So you could make those connections under the board. So there's probably use cases for it. The thing that, like the intellectual use case for me, is taking a look at that picture of the denuded clips, just all arranged neatly on a board like that, and saying, that's where all that extra capacitance comes from. When you look at that, you're like, okay, all right. Other than that, it's, a solderless breadboard is a black box, white box, whatever color it is. You don't really have a concept of what's in there. You sort of do. There's metal clips and things like that in there, but when you see it all laid out before you, you're like, okay, that's why I'm not using this on 100 megahertz designs or something like that, because that's just going to cause problems. The other thing that's interesting about it is looking at what's necessary to make a clip like that, and along with any other sort of tiny little bits and pieces, like the terminals in the dip socket that's right next to it here. That's all progressive stamping, progressive die forming. That process in itself is really, really fascinating. How they make the dies for that, how they put that in the press, what each individual part of that does. Because something like this probably is going to take 7 or 8 individual dies, because there's going to be the like preforming, and then there's going to be cutting dies, the ones that bend the ears up into a contact, ones that squeeze them together. I mean, be all kinds of different things, and they'll just go along with a strip of beryllium copper or whatever that material is. Or it looks like it's actually gold plated, doesn't it? And then that will just feed into this stamper, and it'll just go chukunk, 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 chukunk. And once you've made the tools, the individual pieces don't cost anything to make, relatively speaking. I mean, it's a non-zero amount, but it's pretty darn close to zero. So, once you've got the tooling done, you just crank these out. It's just getting the tooling done and getting to that sort of break-even point where you can, when you can start making money on what you paid for the tooling. And that whole part of it is really, really interesting. Okay, next up for me is Al Williams' optimistic article, Farewell Magnetic Stripe. This is coming from the BBC, and they're basically talking about how the magnetic stripes, like on the back of credit cards, the days are numbered for that technology. And this is kind of like fusion power. It's always just around the corner. It never seems to go away. Those stripes just keep showing up on new cards, even though the card has a chip in it, and it's got RFID and or NRF or whatever technology they're using to get your numbers off the card and into a point of sale terminal. Whatever technology they decide to put on and in the card, it doesn't matter. That piece of cassette tape looking magnetic stripe is always going to be there, in my opinion. I don't think they'll ever get rid of it. This thing has been, a minor bane of my existence for decades now. Yes, there's something about my wallet or about me personally, where I keep my wallet in my back pocket and like sitting in the car. I don't know what it is, but that magnetic stripe begins wearing out almost instantly, from the day I get a fresh new card and it's all nice and shiny and everything, and I put my scribble on the back of it, and then the magnetic stripe just looks gorgeous and clean, and I'm so looking forward to going to the store and actually swiping my card, and I swipe it and the transaction goes no problem. 2 weeks later, swipe that card, try again, whatever. And I was so happy when chips came out on cards, because I was like, no, I'm not going to have this problem anymore, where, I'm standing in line with 16 people behind me and trying to run my card and it's not working. But that only changed the problem. Now I put my chip in the chip reader and it doesn't read. Like, oh, okay, you got to take it out 3 times and then swipe it, and then the swipe won't work. I know, first world problems, but still annoying and unnecessary, I think. And I don't understand why it's become such a problem authenticating people to their accounts and getting their money. You'd figure there'd be a serious incentive to retailers for card readers that work so clerks don't necessarily have to say, oh, bend the card down so it makes contact with the card reader, with the chip reader. Or even like I've had clerks just grab my card and start swiping it themselves. I'm like, hey, get your hands off of that thing. It's mine. It's my money. Yeah? So anyways, the prediction of magnetic stripes going away, I think, are probably optimistic, because despite the fact that it never seems to work when I need it to, it does exist as a technology that's tried and true, and I think that it'll probably be there. I don't know that I feel really super comfortable about doing Google Pay or any of those apps. I don't really, I don't really want to do that part of it. I would rather have the physical token of a credit card, and have that, be reliable and work. But that whole, sort of have something, know something, aspect of security, because, maybe, okay, it's only a 4-digit PIN, but you still know the PIN, right? And you've got something physical, the card. So to me, that's secure, and I'm not sure I really feel like waving a phone at something is going to necessarily be secure. And again, just go to all cash, just pay cash for everything, and really that changes things entirely when you start paying with cash for everything. So, anyways, I still think the technology is probably here to stay for a while, no matter how crappy it is.
I want to be able to go to a store with a cheese grater and a block of gold and just be like, hold out your hand and how much was it? Say when, right? Like the old days. I mean, I'm with you with the concern about, tap pay, whether it's on the card or on the phone. I think also one of the problems, at least in the U.S., a lot of places still don't take the tap thing anyway. So even if you went all in on it, like I know Home Depot very famously doesn't support it. Like there's even I've been to a Home Depot that had like a sign on the door that said like, no, you cannot pay with your phone. You must use a card. And I guess like everything else, that's going to change with time. But I guess that just kind of goes back to the point you made, right? Like the tried and true stuff is still here. And reading this kind of reminded me of, we did an article not long ago. I'll put that in the show notes, about like the death of the 1D barcode. They want to do these barcodes that are kind of sort of QR codes that can, put more data in them and do stuff like embed the expiration date into the UPC so that like if you go and scan something, it can come up and say, hey, this thing's about to expire. Are you sure you want to buy it? There's cool stuff that could be done, but I'm pretty sure we're still going to have the regular barcode for the rest of my life, at the very least, because it just works and all the infrastructure is out there. And as neat as it might sound, we have smart products. It's not just the registers that need to get changed. You got to change the hardware that's printing these tags, and then I'm sure there's somebody's got their hand out for licensing fees. Sometimes the old stuff just works. Even like you said, even when it doesn't always work, most of the time it works. Because I've had the same problem too with the chip. I've had the cashier just give me the card. just give me the card, because you don't know the trick. I'll know the trick. It reminds me of trying to get like the NES game to work, right? You gotta blow on the cartridge, and let me put it in like a little bit at an angle, or I push this side down first and then hit the power button. The most first world problems. Well, for my last pick, I almost felt bad about putting this at the end, because I was very impressed with this, and I know it did get a lot of eyes on it, but I don't want to say low effort, but everything worked very well, and it didn't require too many hoops to jump through. So as a hack, we have to kind of push it to the back of the line a little bit, but it is a very cool accomplishment. This is running stock MS-DOS on a modern ThinkPad, and this comes from Yo Meng. He wanted to see basically what is the newest computer that could still run DOS. And when we say DOS, we're going to call that version 6.22, which was the last standalone, which is still from 94, so still officially 30 years old, even the last release. Forget about like the earlier ones. What could you actually run that on, right? Because it's 30 years, and you could certainly give Microsoft and everyone else involved a pass for not being able to install that on your shiny new computer. But the reality is actually a little surprising here, because at least for the Lenovo ThinkPad line, they kept like old school BIOS backwards compatibility up to 2020. And it's only after that point that they go all in on UEFI and stuff like that, and drop the old school, what is now called like legacy boot and that kind of thing. So he said, all right, well, 2020 still has like this legacy stuff. So he goes out and grabs one of these, it's a ThinkPad X13, Intel powered. And, he goes into the settings and turns on everything that said legacy. Everything that said legacy was turned on, and everything that said like secure boot and signing and all that goes off. And critically, there was actually an option in there for a Thunderbolt assist mode, which he describes it as basically it tells the operating system that Thunderbolt devices are just like PCI cards, so that older operating systems, I'm sure they weren't thinking MS-DOS at the time, but older operating systems would be able to figure out Thunderbolt devices. So he hits all the switches, and the kind of the one modern convenience here is instead of using the actual floppies, he grabbed a USB floppy emulator, which basically, you can put a bunch of floppy images on a flash drive, and it's like a little screen, and you can pick them. It's a pretty cool thing for, we see them used in like retro computing a lot. Load a bunch of games on there. So he put the DOS 6.22 install disks on the emulator, plugged it in, and just installed DOS on this 2020 laptop. And I think the most surprising thing is just like everything worked. There was no, I had to hex edit something to make this work, or I had to, shib, like it just worked. And it was really, he came away just very impressed at, the work that like Intel and Lenovo and everybody involved has done to keep that. I mean, it's a remarkable backwards compatibility. 30 years that you could install this operating system on here, and it just works out of the box. Now, what does just works mean, right, for a DOS computer? You could see the screen, and you could type things, and you could access files, and that's kind of what you get out of the box with DOS. The sound didn't work. It has, modern Intel HD sound, but he was actually able to find an online open source DOS driver, lets the Intel HD audio basically masquerade as a sound blaster card. So it picked that up. He had to shuttle that on through some kind of removable device to get the new driver on, but he was able to make all the games and stuff see the Intel audio as Sound Blaster. Using the Thunderbolt, he was able to plug in several network adapters, gigabit network adapters at that. And again, you had to do a little hunting for drivers and stuff, but the fact is they were out there, right? And he was able to find them and install them. And in the end, everything worked. He was able to hook it up to his external drives and his network. And he did, I think the interesting thing to me is, he does some benchmarking. And a lot of the benchmark apps just like fell over immediately because they were just, I must imagine they were just so shocked by what they were presented with. They just passed out. They're like, this how many gigs of RAM? And they just fell over. But the ones that would run, as you might imagine, produce some pretty spectacular numbers because, these benchmarks were meant to run on like a 486. And now you're at a contemporary machine with 8 gigahertz cores and probably 16 gigs of RAM and everything else. So it's just a really cool example of how sometimes things work the way they're supposed to. Like this is what we want, right? You'd want to be able to have this kind of backwards compatibility that you can grab any old software and throw it on there. The other side of the coin is, unfortunately, that this no longer works as of the 2021 models because they took away all this legacy stuff. Apparently the directive came from Intel, in my understanding, to start taking this legacy stuff out because I guess they don't want to keep dealing with it. So Lenovo is one of the big name ones that kind of publish their timeline. The other companies will likely follow suit. But hey, I mean, even if 2020 is the newest computer you have to get, that's not bad.
It's not that old.
Right. If you got some old DOS thing and you got to run it and, you don't have the source, but, and it happens. We've covered that before. You might have some weird furnace controller that comes with some DOS software and nobody ever updated it and all your tenants are cold because you can't start the furnace. You know what I mean? Like, there's an option, right? You could get one of these ThinkPads from 2020, put DOS on it and run the software. So that's I think the big takeaway is that there are options. And of course, going beyond that, we've covered, some of this newly made retro hardware that is actually using older chips to let you run DOS and the old games on something that was made, recently. So I like the mag stripe, right? Like it's gonna be around for a long time.
Somewhere there's a sewage treatment plant IT guy who's reading this article going, yes!
Yeah, like
Finally.
job security just came through. Wow.
I can keep this plant running another week.
I would be curious to see him kind of redo this experiment and use one of the earlier versions. I would imagine the results would be largely the same. I don't know that a whole lot changed at the low level.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, if you're listening. And you still got the ThinkPad set up. Try to put the MS-DOS, maybe not one necessarily, but something older. Let's see how far back you can go.
Last up for me, hidden gutter antenna keeps HOA happy. Oh, yeah, HOAs. For those who don't have the pleasure of living under even more government, that's what HOAs actually are. They're, basically, if you aren't familiar with them, a lot of neighborhoods in the United States have them, and they range in powers from being able to tell you what you can and can't park on the road, or whether you park in the garage, and maybe there's a few rules about consistency about colors of your house or something like that. Then there's other ones that are completely dictatorial and will have patrols of people going around looking for the slightest violation and writing you up and fining you, and they have the power to do that because you signed a deed that says I will allow this. Well, HOAs are not famously happy with ham radio operators who put up, admittedly big ugly antennas on their house so that they can, do their thing. This is Bob, Kilo Delta 4 Bravo Mike Golf, is a ham who is trying to use some stealth antennas, and he's managed to pull a fast one over on his HOA by turning his gutters into antennas. Now, I've seen gutter antennas where the antenna is just laying in the gutter. But he's not doing that here. He's actually connecting to the gutters, which are made of aluminum, and tuning those up as antennas in his on his ham rig. This is kind of just another one of those willet antenna thing, and you could pretty much make an antenna out of anything. But whether it's a good antenna or not is another thing altogether. And there's no substitute for a lot of space, so you can stretch out a dipole or a big tower you can put a Yagi on, but you're not getting away with that in most neighborhoods, even if they don't have HOAs. And just for the record, I don't have an HOA in my neighborhood. I got antennas all over the place. But they kind of blend in. They're not big and obnoxious or anything like that. It's a cool story about using the metal parts of your house as an antenna. One wonders, you could probably if you had a metal roof, you could probably do something there. I've seen people string up quote unquote Christmas lights to get around HOA limits and actually have an antenna run along with the Christmas lights. Looks like Bob here also has a stealth sloper antenna somewhere. I've seen people do antennas inside of flagpoles. Sometimes flagpoles we like to fly our flags here in the United States. So oftentimes HOAs will deign to let you fly your flag, and you can have a flagpole that will actually act as kind of like a radome. Sometimes use the actual flagpole as a radiating element, or run a wire up inside the flagpole, and I mean there's a lot of ways around it. It's kind of one of those. Those things that intrigues me, the constrained designs. If you've got all the space in the world, you can hang up antennas wherever. That's kind of boring. But If you're fighting against someone who's going to come around on a golf cart and note that you've your grass is a quarter inch too long or something like that, and they're certainly going to twig on a big antenna. And if you got to fight that, that's where some interesting engineering and social engineering comes into play. And I think he kind of hit those notes here with this project.
Yeah, this is one of those ones where, thankfully not everybody has to deal with this, but if you do have to deal with it, it's a great primer into some of the ways that you can get around these problems. I mean, I think, like you said, no one is super thrilled with the idea of a giant antenna. I think even if you're into it, you have to recognize it's kind of an ugly thing to have in the yard. But when that's an ugly thing turns into, you must take it down because, like you said, you signed some agreement. That's where it gets tricky. I like that, and it's linked in the bottom of this post. This is not the first time that he's had to come up with these like hidden antennas. I like last year we covered Bob, and he did an antenna that looks like Christmas lights, which I think is even
that's
kind of cooler.
He's the one who did that.
Like right, yeah. He gets the wire and kind of like runs it along the antenna, clip the actual leads that go to the lights because he didn't want to like capacitively couple and stuff like that. So
right.
I like that there's this whole theme that he's working with. It's like he's doing this personal battle with the homeowners association, and always coming up with what's gonna come up with this episode? Like, what's the new way to fool them? I imagine some daft, like you said, it's like he comes around in a golf cart and twirling their mustache, like, where did he hide the antenna this time?
Yeah, I mean the comments. We got 101 comments, and almost all of them are on HOAs, and the evil of HOAs. But everybody seems to be buying houses that are in HOAs, and they're just like, oh well, it's a really cute house, I really like it, and whatever. I wouldn't volunteer. When we were looking for the house we're in now, it was one of the first thing we looked for. HOA, nope, not doing that one. Real estate agent got really mad with us, at us, because I was like, they're all in HOAs. Like, well, find one that isn't, and we did. So.
Okay, for my first quick hack, I picked using a 2D scanner to make 3D things. This is not probably news for some of the more experienced 3D printer parts makers out there, but it's a cool trick that I think needs to be brought up once in a while. In this case, Chuck wanted to recreate rather, some track used for little cars, and rather than trying to design the profile of the track manually, he just kind of put it face down on a regular 2D flatbed scanner, and that gave him the profile, and then it was just a matter of turning that into a SVG and extending it out into the third dimension. Granted, this is a pretty simplistic example of the technique, but I know personally I've been able to do this a couple times where I just put something on the 2D scanner, got an image, and at least use that to give me something to start with when I start working in the 3D realm. And speaking of 3D printers, my second quick hack is V-slot wheels or linear rails. Al Williams wrote this one up. It's a video from Spencer that, asks, are linear rails better than the V-slot wheels that you see on some of these cheaper printers? And this one really got people going. We saw a lot of comments, a lot of views on this one, and it seemed like a big debate. The interesting kind of takeaway is, for people who've been maybe 3D printing for a while, like linear rails were always like this holy grail. That's what you'd upgrade to if you had the money, because your machine came with regular bearings or wheels or whatever. And in the video, Spencer, he kind of went head to head and found that isn't necessarily the case on modern printers, because, we have these new software tricks, linear advance and all this kind of stuff that it can kind of compensate for any wonkiness in the machine. So it seems to be a case where the modern software that our printers are running have solved this problem for us. And while the linear rail upgrade might have been something to chase back when you're using, I don't know, wooden 3D printers. Now it's a little bit less of the bragging rights. And finally, war driving tools in the modern era. This is an interesting write-up from Simon, who's been war driving since using a PCMCIA card in a PDA, and it's just kind of a look at what the modern war driving / Wi-Fi reconnaissance toolkit looks like compared to what was all the rage back in the early 2000s. And not a big surprise of the who's in the modern toolkit. You have the Raspberry Pi, of course. You got a modern Android phone, which does a lot of the heavy lifting, especially thanks to like the Wiggle app and that kind of thing. The Flipper Zero gets a shout out, although you need to add a Wi-Fi upgrade board to it, so a little bit honorable mention there. But just a cool look if you've been out of the game for a while, of like what the latest and greatest is for looking for Wi-Fi and exploring the unseen networks around us.
Okay, first up on my quick picks is Steg's backlight switch for a better multimeter. The news here to me was that Aldi sells multimeters. We don't have Aldi's around here. We used to have it back where I used to live. I miss it so much. It was so good. And that little middle section of the store that had these kind of things, like you could buy a 3D printer there, was always great. I remember I bought a great set of chisels there. Anyways, the hack here was basically that the backlight for the multimeter kept going off after 15 seconds, and that's not acceptable sometimes. So stuck just a simple SPST switch in the side of it, and some people took exception to the fact that there'd be metal sticking out of the side of a multimeter, and that might ruin the cat rating on the multimeter. I'm saying it's an Aldi's multimeter. Get over it. Next up, it turns out a PCB makes a nice watch dial. I have always been kind of in love with the look and feel of PCB material, especially when it's got like a really cool black solder mask on it, and the contrast between the solder mask and the screen printing and the pad showing through can be really good. Really good looking. Indoor Geek decided to build a mechanical watch, and use a PCB as a dial, and you'd be hard pressed to say that it wasn't a fine piece of whatever they normally use for watch dials, brass, I guess, brass disc or something like that. It really looks gorgeous, and you can get pretty much anything you want made on it, laser cut, and almost nothing in cost. So it's a good idea for structural as well as electrical stuff. And finally, you can 3D print yourself some simple magnetic switches. Andrew Klein has worked up a way to 3D print a couple of fixtures to hold neodymium magnets, but be able to turn them off, which I've always found very fascinating, that you can actually do that, that you can turn on and off permanent magnets. It has to do with how they're oriented relative to each other and their polarities, but you can easily nullify that magnetic field by switching this disc to one position to the other. You see these magnetic switches on things like the holders for dial indicators and things like that, and this is a great way to kind of get an idea of how they work, plus maybe make an effective tool.
Well, now it's time to look at a couple of the can't miss articles written by our fantastic Hackaday writers. For my pick, I went with Donald Papp's "What's New in 3D Scanning? All-in-One Scanning is Nice." There you go. That's the story, right? This is kind of an update to Don's been doing a lot of the 3D printing kind of state-of-the-art articles for us for a while, and he did one on 3D scanning back in 2021, and the idea here was this is sort of a what's changed in the last 3 years, because this kind of stuff moves quick. For the purposes of the article, he does use a 3D scanner that he got from RevoPoint, but there's really nothing specific to that scanner here. It's really just, what can you expect from, a modern dedicated scanner? What's the workflow look like? What's the accuracy? And sort of just kind of, I know a lot of people, myself included, when I got a 3D printer, I thought like the 3D scanner was the next thing, right? Like they would go hand in hand, and the reality was not. Especially the early 3D scanners were not the kind of thing that would do us a lot of good. They didn't have the kind of accuracy you'd want to maybe to replace broken parts and that sort of thing. They were more maybe, if you wanted to roughly duplicate like a little statuette or something, But now the state of the art has improved a lot, and the scanners like this one, everything's done on the device itself, and you just walk around the object. It can do big stuff, little stuff. You can put it on a tripod and spin your target object. So the scanning itself has improved a lot. The actual user experience, but then that's only half of it. Donald also goes into what you actually get out of the machine, and that's kind of the more important thing for us, because we want something we can use and that we can work with. For the hackers and makers, the goal with a 3D scanner would be to say, hey, here's a broken piece. Let me scan it and be able to recreate it in the computer and print out a duplicate, or here I got to make something that matches up to something else. And to do that, you want a file you can edit, right? And the problem that Donald says here is that these scanners, on the whole, spit out, a mesh. They'll give you an STL or maybe an object file, but you're not getting a editable CAD file out of this thing. You're getting a 3D mesh of what it picked up, and that's where some of the trouble comes in. You have to kind of adjust your workflow. I think anybody who's got a 3D printer and has tried to edit an STL knows how unpleasant that can be. I mean, if you're just trying to cut it in half or scale it, that's one thing. But if you're trying to really take it apart and recreate it, it can quickly become very unpleasant. I mean, it's simply not made for that. An STL it's not a CAD file. It's a little bit like getting the exported image out of an image editor. You don't get all the layers and the stuff that made the image. You just get the final result. That being said, Donald does show off a couple really impressive examples that kind of got me sold on the idea. One of the ones he starts off with is he had just as an example, he said, okay, I want to make a housing for this fan. Just, pick something out of the garbage pile. And, he scanned the fan, and we're talking like a little centrifugal kind of fan that you might see on a 3D printer. This is not a big object. He scanned that, and that gave him an STL of it, effectively. And then he was able to subtract that from a square and make a perfectly mating, negative for it. And that was very impressive. He does another one where he gets a piece of foam, cuts a rough hole out of it, and then scans it to make a plug, which was very cool. And I think perhaps the most impressive one is he says, well, I want to make an ergonomic grip for something, right? So he gets some regular modeling clay, grabs it in his fist, and then 3D scans that. With the resulting STL, he cuts it in half, he puts a cylinder through it to make a 2-piece assembly with a void, and then he prints it, and he's able to put that on a handle. And it has the exact curvature of his hand because it was scanned from that original grip. So even though you're not getting a proper CAD file out of these scanners, you can make it work. It takes a little bit more massaging than you might hope for, but there's certainly potential here, and there's still not the magic press a button and you have an exact duplicate that we kind of the Star Trek level of replication we were hoping for, but they're a lot better than when I last checked in with them. Certainly after reading this, I'm not ready to buy one today, but I could certainly see it being something I get in the near future, because I could, just from these couple examples, I could see of a couple times I would have liked that rather than the caliper and hope for the best method I usually use for replicating objects.
Yeah, it really wasn't that long ago that I seem to remember anyways that 3D scanning was kind of a much more physical like real world thing where you need to like have a stylus and that was attached to like an arm, and there's potentiometers or encoders or something at every one of these axes or any one of the joints, and you just kind of, poke the object, press a button, poke the object, press a button. You keep moving along, and this is capturing the point cloud basically, but you're doing it manually, and you're going point by point by point by point. And obviously, you get tired of doing that after a while. So you probably end up with a model that's based on a couple of dozen points rather than thousands of points. And I mean, that's a huge increase in productivity right there alone. And it just fascinates me too that you're basically just waving a camera, quote unquote camera, around in front of an object, and it's figuring out everything. There's no reference to a fixed point. The object itself, I guess, is the reference point, and the software is figuring out where each one of those reflected datum or data, I guess, are coming from, and how they relate to each other. That stuff just blows my mind. Am I gonna buy one of these? Probably not. I don't really have the use case for it until I do. And then I'll be like, oh man, that would be a great tool to just, to just have to reproduce that one part. I work on a lot of old cars and things like, plastic pieces that just wear out, and you could just zap out a quick one if you could only, the actual printing of it would be trivial. It would be the scanning, or not the scanning, the measuring with the calipers and the, and putting it on a copier to get the scan on one side and then the other, and getting all that together and trying to make a replica of that part would be ridiculously difficult. In the data capture part, actually turning it into something, and into turning it into actual hardware would be trivial with a 3D printer. It's just the quote unquote design of it. It's not really design. It's, it's capturing it from reality. So yeah, something like this. I wonder if the tool rental stores of the future will be places where you can rent something like this, or you could take your widget in and say, hey, replicate this for me. The replication store.
There you go.
Okay, I just had my $1 million idea, right? There you go.
No, I was actually, when you're talking about, I was thinking the same thing. Like, yeah, this is not necessarily something I'd want to buy, but I'd love to rent it.
Yeah.
Occasionally, right?
Or have a friend.
What are friends? Can I get one of those? Certainly the kind of thing, maybe everybody goes in on the makerspace, right? They all chip in, and the makerspace has one. They can.
I guess that's what a makerspace really is, right?
Yeah. And you mentioned about the physical poking of object versus doing it optically, and Don does go a little bit into the realities of that, and he says that this is, I guess, what you call a structured light scanner. So it is effectively a camera. It looks remarkably like a camera too, actually. Well, very bulky camera, but still a camera. And it's shooting out an IR grid or whatever that helps, but the software looks for like physical characteristics that it can pick out. Like, so it has to like find a waypoint on the object itself that it can apparently do on its own. But it's he did say that sometimes with like certain like reflective objects that give it problems, or things that are weird shapes, you might have to stick little markers on it, like there's little marker stickers apparently you can put on there, and that gives it a reference point,
fiducial marks,
on the object. And then he also talks about, and I had no idea this was a thing, apparently there's some companies that make 3D scanning spray, which is really interesting. Yeah, he even links to it. I've never heard of this, but it not only knocks down the reflectivity, like it's a matte kind of spray, but I guess it's easier to scan. They're like primary colors, so it's easier for him to scan those colors. And then it it just goes away. Apparently, you spray it and it puts this like matte color on the thing, and then it just evaporates. It's not a paint, you know. He says like in a half hour the color just evaporates away, which is pretty cool.
Weird.
I never even. I wonder if I could use this to like graffiti somebody's car, and then just freak them out, and then it just disappears in a half hour. I'm like, what happened? I don't know. What are you so mad about?
Gaslight paint.
Yeah, right. What? You tagged or what?
You're crazy.
It's very cool to see the state of the art and how much it's improved, even from the one he looked at a couple years ago. Accuracy was a lot higher than I expected, especially when he scans the plug to go into a hole in the. I mean, this is like a rough hole in a piece of foam, and you can imagine all the little weird ridges and stuff that it picked up. So this is probably a lot closer to what I imagined 3D scanning was going to be back in the day. So I'm glad the technology is getting closer to where I expected it to be, and what I'm really excited for, I think, is the next couple of years when it starts to get cheaper. The printers went from ridiculous money that that only a couple people could justify to now Amazon Prime Day's got a half dozen printers. I'm waiting for a similar thing to happen with the scanners, and I think that's when the fun really starts.
Okay, my can't miss for this week is Boss Byproducts. Fordites are pieces of American history by Christina Panos. Now, I'm excited about this for a number of reasons. Number one is I've got a piece of Fordite in my hot little hand right now, and I've always really appreciated this stuff. But I mean, we'll talk about that in a second. But the main reason is because Christina started a new series, and this one looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. I mean, she starts off with a story about how Robert Cheeseborough, quote unquote, discovered Vaseline when he was out in the oil fields in Pennsylvania in the 1850s. He discovered it through drillers used this stuff that came up on the drill rods when they were drilling the holes, and called it rod wax. And it was this sort of waxy, petroleum byproduct, and you refined it and Vaseline, and it's been a product for 150 or more years now, and been super successful. But it was a byproduct of industry, and so her series is going to focus on all these kind of things that were not necessarily intended to be the product, but ended up being probably more valuable than the thing that they were originally derived from, although probably not in the case of petroleum. But anyways, Fordite. Fordite is, if you haven't heard of it, it is a man-made agate. So think about your minerals and stuff like that. You've seen agate is sort of a sedimentary rock where different kinds of sediment went into each layer, different colors, different consistencies. And when you take a piece of that material and cut it across those grains, you get these beautiful patterns that you can polish up. And I guess actually they're not sedimentary, they're metamorphic, but whatever, that's geology. It's basically the same kind of thing, except it comes from the painting lines of automotive manufacturers who for years used enamel-based paints that were sprayed, just like, spray paint. And all the overspray accumulates on different pieces of the paint booth or the paint line, different machinery and stuff like that. And that a new layer, a new car comes in, it gets painted, primered, paint, clear coat. And so all of that paint accumulates on the machinery, on the frames, on the walls, on the various bits and pieces in the booth, that all the things that aren't a car, presumably also the workers. But and the robots, I guess, later on in the car manufacturing history, robots were doing this rather than people. But Fordite was discovered, quote unquote, by people who took this material once it cured, chipped it off of the machinery as you'd have to do for maintenance, and then cut, polished, and presented these pieces as, I mean, they're to me, it looks like gemstone quality, but I guess that actually has a specific, definition. Gemological Institute of America has different grades for different kinds of gems, and they actually do sort of categorize Fordite as a gem. Now, Fordite is maybe a little bit of a misnomer. It's not just Ford. Was plenty of other manufacturers used the same processes to paint their cars and ended up with the same slag. So sometimes it's called Detroit agate. I suppose there's probably a Chevroletite or a or a GMite or whatever. But Fordite is just, it's crisp and clean. You know exactly what you're talking about. The piece I have in my hand, my daughter gave me. I don't know where she found it. It's just a little key fob thing, and I'll post a picture of it in the show notes because I think it's really cool. It's basically white. I mean, they must have painted a lot of white vehicles at the time that this was harvested, but it's got a lot of other colors in it too, and they form just the coolest patterns. It's a little perplexing as to, like, you look at it and you're like, how did that paint accumulate in one direction for one color, but obviously in another direction for another color? In other words, this piece of Fordite comes from a piece of slag that the paint must have come in from multiple directions, which I guess makes sense if you're, sometimes you're painting the top of a car, sometimes you're painting the bottom of a car. But it just, the look of it, and if I just pull out a magnifying lens to take a really close look at it, and some of the layer lines are so fine, tenths of a millimeter. And you can see the progression of primer, color coat, clear coat in some of those. And you just see that repeat over and over again for sometimes the same color coat, sometimes a different color coat. Very, very cool. It's kind of a heat map of the popularity of various colors. There's the card that came with this piece of Fordite says that it came from a Ford Ranger, so pickup truck assembly plant in Wayne, Michigan, in 2020, which is relatively recent, and I think that's I'm not sure. It's just a piece of paper that came with it. So I don't know if that's, authoritative. Whereas in her article, Christina mentions that you don't really see Fordite anymore because they stopped using enamel spray paint for cars, sometime in the 1980s, moving over to like powder coating and stuff like that. But 2020 is not that long ago, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure which way it is. Either way, at the time, white must have been very popular, and it's pickup trucks, fleet vehicles, Ford Rangers, so it's always white's always a popular color with pickups. So that's the predominant color here, but you can see a few reds and a lot more blues and blacks. And there's one tiny little ring of orange. So someone must have ordered like a DOT orange pickup that day. Plus there's a tiny little spot where there's an inclusion of some sort with a like clear coat kind of captured this bubble or protrusion of some sort of the paint. It's really gorgeous. I'll try to catch a picture of it. Anyway, Fordite is very collectible. There's grades of Fordite. I think mine probably comes in as a type 2 or type 1, maybe. I don't know. Somewhere in there. And Christina covers, the grading and all that stuff of that, and how it comes about, and how it's turned into pieces of jewelry and pieces of art. It's in limited supply. Whether or not it's still being produced is kind of an open question here, but it's certainly not going to be. It represents waste. Either way, whether it's made made with enamel paints, or whether it comes from electrostatic powder coating, that kind of thing. It represents money that somebody spent that didn't end up on a product that they can charge money for. So that's waste, and probably to be reduced. So I would imagine that, like anything else in the early days of manufacturing cars, there's probably a lot of paint all over the place, and nobody gave a crap because, it's just, we'll just chip that off and throw it in a river someplace. But as time went on, start getting more sensitive to the environmental wastes and the solvents that are used, and and then the economic waste of it all, and getting more productivity out of your assembly lines. You're probably reducing this stuff to a minimum. So Fordite has always been kind of on a trajectory of scarcity, and I think I feel lucky to have this little piece of it. Although it's not at all uncommon, it's probably not going to stay that way forever, and it's just a really cool piece of automotive history.
Like you were saying, we talked about this before we recorded the podcast, and you had said how recent your sample was, and I also kind of got the impression that this was Americana 60s and 70s was like the peak of this sort of thing, and it was a little surprising that it is still kind of available, even if it maybe is less common than it once was, because of the new production techniques. I mean, I guess they don't do it for final paint, but I know they dip a lot of the bodies and the frames now. So I mean, I saw something, I think they were when they introduced the new Jeep Grand Cherokee, they put out a video of the first runs off the new line, and they had just like a vat of, I guess, some kind of corrosion preventer thing, and the bodies just went, they just went right under them on this little track, and then came back up. So there's no spray at all. They're dragged through I can only imagine how much liquid must be in that vat to dunk an SUV into it. But you have a piece in your hand, right? So there still is some aspect of the process that has overspray. And I get what you're saying too about the designs of them. It's very hard to look at some of these and wrap your mind around how they're produced, because you figure the sprays, the car's not moving. Like the car's in the same spot. The sprayers would be following, you would think, the same kind of path, and yet the different colors have different directions, or at least they appear that way. And it is very, very trippy, some of these ones. And I wonder if maybe it's just the finished product looks that way because they've been kind of skillfully, you expose the layers on one side and then don't expose as much on the other, and it makes it look like there's more. Maybe. You know what I mean? Yeah. I wonder if that's kind of where the artistry comes in, right? Because if you look at Christina has included a picture of like the raw slag or whatever, and that looks like what I would expect it to look like. There's very defined layers. It's very rough. It looks like, surprise, industrial garbage, like it actually is. It looks like the stuff nobody wants after you made something. So I do think there's a little bit of, and I guess you could say the same thing about a gemstone, right? Like you get the gemstone out of the ground, a lot of them don't look like anything special until you gotta know how to cut it and facet it and do the polishing. So I guess that's the overlap between what's produced naturally, or maybe less naturally in the case of this one, and where the effort goes into turning it into something that's actually desirable and collectible. We talked a little about this on the previous podcast, where Christina kind of the origins of the idea, and she said something like, it's actually pretty cheap. And I was like, well, for industrial waste, I suppose you can't ask for a lot. Like you're saving them the money of having to dispose of it, right? Like they'd have to have handled this properly. You'd hope, and instead they're selling it as tourist tchotchkes. So, but yeah, it's very cool. Very cool to see this. I'd heard about it before, but I didn't know about the different variations, and it's always cool to see more of the detail behind it. And I think you had kind of said early on, I think is a great idea for a series.
Yeah,
and I am very interested in that. I know Christina has at least the next one in mind. You have to read Hackaday to see what it is. We're not going to give you any spoilers, but there is a lot of stuff that is produced as a byproduct, and that we don't realize. When she kind of talked about it, I immediately thought about your post you did about spearmint, right? Like the spearmint flavor is like the byproduct of like some petroleum thing, and it's like, oh, okay, like you don't realize where some of this stuff comes from.
Yeah, I mean, sulfur. Sulfur is a perfect example of a byproduct. It comes out of sweetening crude oil, high sulfur crude oil, and they just extract it from that and then pass that on to further refining process and all that stuff. So super useful stuff comes from, surprise, surprise, from petroleum. Like we get probably 80% of our stuff comes from petroleum in one way or another. So yeah, definitely looking forward to the series. I'm gonna shamelessly, insert myself into this at some point and write one of the series myself. That's okay. I think that's what we do. If I can think of something, other than the sulfur that I already mentioned, that I already wrote that up. But yeah, definitely looking forward to it. And it's also interesting to look at that, like the raw slag, and wonder about the changing tastes in car colors. And I think she even mentioned it in the article, early on, you're, any color you want as long as it's black, although,
right.
That never really was a thing. Actually, black was an optional color early on in the, in Ford's history. You had to pay extra for it. But the not only the colors, but the extra stuff that they do for, pearlescence, mica chips, the classic, candy apple red for the 57 Chevy, all of the extra, bits and pieces they put in. I've done very, very little body work, but I've done some, and going to the auto body paint shop and ordering the color I needed to fix my truck was a lesson all in itself. The color code is on the VIN label, like on a door pillar or something like that, and you just copy that. It's like a 3-letter code. And how much information can you put in a 3-letter code? Well, enough information to describe absolutely everything about how to make that paint, apparently, because I gave him the 3 or 4-letter code or whatever it was, and he's just like, okay, yeah, fine. And I watched the guy make the paint and mix it up, and it's similar to the process of seeing it done at like Home Depot or something like that, with the little machine that injects a little bit of paint into a base coat and all that stuff. But way more complicated than that, and also way stinkier because it's the solvents that they use and all that. But he's got different kinds of mica additives and pearlescence and matting agents to keep the gloss down, and all kinds of different things that go into this pot, and he just mixes that up, and and gives it to me. And it was an absolute perfect match. No questions asked. Once I got it on the truck and did a clear coat on it, it was perfect. It was like factory. I mean, my body work left a lot to be desired, but it was still it was still pretty amazing to see. And I know, like, now new cars, they've got these ceramic coatings and all kinds of really neat additives. Sometimes you like look at a car and the paint seems to have depth. Like you can't really tell where the car starts and the color ends, or where the metal is, because it's just like there's just so much depth to it, and coatings and this kind of stuff has come a long way since, any color you like, as long as it's black and it was enamel or lacquer and just baked on. Seeing a little bit of the history behind it and turning it into something else is kind of cool.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of the Hackaday Podcast. Thanks, as always, for listening. If you see anything cool or do anything cool, or if you have any cool friends you want to tell us about, you can always email us at tips@hackaday.com. You can also find the show notes for this episode and all previous episodes on Hackaday. And until next time,
keep on hacking.
This is where the title goes.
I get it, but I don't like it.
Do you think Reese Witherspoon had to edit this thing?
That's what a Big Mac... I've been in a McDonald's in decades.